3 years ago, my life split in half. Not because I died not exactly, but because the crash took everything that made me feel alive. My legs, my independence, my marriage. The man I loved lasted exactly 3 months after the accident, just long enough to convince himself he could be the husband of a woman who would never hike again, never dance barefoot in the kitchen, never climb the stairs on her own. One morning, he left a voicemail and a neatly folded stack of clothes on the table. No note, no goodbye. Just silence. So I moved here into this small wooden house outside of Missoula, Montana, a place where the wind never quite stops and the mountains feel like they're watching, alone, except for him, Caleb. My ex-husband's son from a previous marriage. He was 20 then. Tall, quiet eyes like storm clouds that always seemed to know more than they should. He moved in after the accident just for a bit, he said. To help. That was 941 days ago. He does everything now. Grocery runs, dishes. Lifts me in and out of the tub on the bad days. I wake some mornings to the smell of bacon and find him in the kitchen, bedhead, messy shirt wrinkled, flipping pancakes like this is his place too. Sometimes I forget he's 23 now. Sometimes I forget I'm 35. And sometimes I forget that this isn't the life either of us imagined. There's no manual for losing your mobility, no guidebook for how to exist when your whole identity was tied to motion. But Caleb never flinched. Not when I screamed in pain, not when I shattered plates against the wall, not when I broke down at 3 a.m. begging for a version of myself I couldn't get back. He stayed, even when I told him to go. That's the part no one warns you about when you're broken. It's not the loneliness that haunts you. It's the quiet tenderness. The way someone folds the blanket over your legs without a word. The way they remember how you take your tea even though you stopped asking months ago. And when their hand brushes yours no longer by accident but by habit, something flickers. Something dangerous. Something you don't know whether to run from or toward. But I can't run anymore. So I just feel. And lately, that's been the scariest part. It started on a Tuesday. I tried carrying a laundry basket from the bedroom to the hallway. 10 feet. Halfway through, my legs locked up. I hit the floor hard. Clothes everywhere. My hips screaming. I didn't cry. I just stayed there flat on my back waiting for the pain to pass. Then I heard the door creak. Caleb said, his voice low and knowing. He always knows. He dropped beside me, not touching, just hovering. I'm fine, I lied. You should have called me. I didn't want to make it a thing. It is a thing. And then he scooped me up, arms under my knees, and back like I weighed nothing. Like I was a bride crossing a threshold instead of a woman who hadn't felt whole in years. For a second, I let my head rest on his chest. He smelled like sawdust and soap. Familiar. Grounding. He set me on the couch, gently brushed a strand of hair from my face without thinking. You're shaking, he said. It's just adrenaline. Let me help. I thought he'd go grab the heating pad. Instead, he rolled up my pant leg. Caleb. I started, but stopped the second his hand touched behind my knee. Firm pressure. Not rushed. Practiced. Slow. He'd done this before. Dozens of times. But this time, the way his thumbs moved higher. Slower, something burned low in my stomach. He paused. I held my breath. Then, without a word, he pulled the blanket over my legs and stood. You need to eat. I'll make eggs. And he disappeared into the kitchen. I stared at the ceiling pulse thudding in my neck, convincing myself it was nothing, that I imagined it, that I wanted it. That night, a storm rolled in. Classic Montana thunder, deep and endless. The power went out like a switch. Caleb lit candles like it was routine, then handed me a mug of chamomile tea without asking. He sat beside me on the couch. Not close, but close enough. And then under the blanket, our legs brushed. Not on purpose. But neither of us moved. My fingers gripped the mug tighter. I used to love storms, I whispered. You still can, he said softly. You don't have to stop loving things just because the world changed. And then his hand reached for mine. Deliberate, steady, no accident. His fingers laced through mine. Caleb, I whispered. But I didn't pull away. He didn't say anything, just looked at me. And in his eyes, I didn't see pity. I saw want, heat, need, something that made my breath stutter. And just like that, the lights flicked back on bright and uninvited. We sprang apart. He stood fast, pacing, mumbling something about the fuse box, even though the power was clearly fine, and I sat there, hands still tingling. Heart pounding, knowing something had just changed. Forever. The next day, I pretended nothing had happened, which meant I moved a little slower, avoided eye contact, made coffee I didn't drink. Caleb didn't push. He never does. But something was different. Every time he passed behind my wheelchair, I felt the air shift. Every brush of his hand steady familiar lingered half a second too long. Every silence stretched just a little farther than it used to. I told myself I was imagining it, until it happened again. I was at the dining table, laptop open, trying to focus. My legs were tight, restless. Sitting too long always made them rebel. I shifted in my seat, trying to find relief. Without saying a word, Caleb came up behind me and knelt. His palm rested on my shin. "You're tensing again," he said quietly. I didn't move, didn't breathe. He looked up at me, his eyes unreadable, waiting. I could have said no, I could have stopped him, but I didn't. His hands moved gently, calves, thighs. Slow, careful, controlled. But something in the stillness between us wasn't. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine." I lied. He didn't believe me, but he didn't press. Just adjusted the blanket like he always did and left me alone with the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. That night, the rain didn't come, but the tension did. We sat in the living room, me on the couch, him in the armchair. A movie played, but neither of us watched it. I knew he was waiting for something. Maybe I was too. Then Thursday happened, the kind of day that pretends to be quiet. But you know it's lying. He got home early. His shirt clung to his back, sweat darkening the fabric. He kicked off his boots like always deliberate, solid present. I was curled up on the couch blanket across my lap, flipping through a magazine I hadn't read. He looked at me. Really looked. "You look stiff. I'm just tired." He walked over and lifted my legs into his lap. He'd done it 100 times before, but this time his hands lingered. His thumbs pressed into my calves, then higher. His touch wasn't clinical anymore. It was speaking, not to my body, to something else entirely. "You've been pushing too hard again," he murmured. "You built me a ramp so I wouldn't have to," I whispered. He smiled soft. "Doesn't mean I want you hurting." His hand slid up to my thighs, confident, familiar, but my pulse picked up anyway. I looked at him. He was already watching me, eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. Quiet, certain. "This isn't just about pain relief anymore, is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, his fingers brushed the edge of my shorts. We both froze. Then slowly I reached down. My hand circled his wrist. Our eyes locked. My breath tangled with his. "Tell me to stop," he said. But I didn't. And in that quiet space between hesitation and choice, everything fell. He leaned in and kissed me. Not soft, not tentative, but hungry, controlled, like he'd been waiting years. His hands gripped my thighs, my fingers curled into the damp cotton of his shirt. I gasped into him, letting go in a way I hadn't since before the accident. His mouth trailed down my neck, biting gently at the pulse he'd just set on fire. And when he slipped his hand beneath the hem of my shirt, brushing the scars, the stretch marks, the story I carried in my skin, I let him. Because in that moment, I wasn't broken. I was wanted, not out of duty, not because I needed help, but because he needed me. And that changed everything. The morning after didn't feel like waking up from a dream. It felt like waking inside a question neither of us knew how to answer. Caleb was still asleep when I opened my eyes. His arm was draped over my waist. Our legs tangled under the blanket. His breath steady and warm against the back of my neck. It should have felt safe. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of something irreversible. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the fan's slow rotation, listening to the wind scrape against the windows, listening to the clock tick, like it had somewhere to be, like it didn't care what we'd done. Eventually, Caleb stirred. I closed my eyes and pretended to still be asleep. He kissed my shoulder, soft, careful, like he thought I might break. Then he slipped out of bed. I heard the whisper of clothes, the creak of the floor, the water running in the kitchen. When I rolled into the doorway, he was standing at the stove, shirtless, making coffee like nothing had changed. He turned, smiled. That same boyish grin that used to feel innocent. Now it felt complicated. Morning, he said. I nodded. You're up early. So are you. He poured 2 mugs and handed me one. For a while, we just stood there, steam curling between us like a smoke signal neither of us wanted to read. Then finally, he asked, Are you okay? I nodded again. He didn't believe me, but he didn't push. Instead, he reached across the counter and took my hand, same as the night before. But it didn't feel like tenderness now. It felt like weight. I pulled away gently. He didn't flinch, but his shoulders dropped. The rest of the day passed like we were strangers who remembered too much. At lunch, he made grilled cheese. I didn't eat mine. At 4:00, he mowed the lawn. I watched him from the window. At 6:30, we sat at the table, food untouched between us. Finally, he put his fork down. You're punishing me, he said. No, I replied. I'm protecting us. From what I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time since the crash, I felt myself splinter in a different place. From what people will say. From what this could do to you. You're young, Caleb. You haven't lived enough yet to see how fast admiration turns into regret. His jaw clenched. I'm not ashamed. You will be. He stood, walked to the sink, turned on the water like it could rinse the truth off his hands. Then, without looking at me, he said, I've already made my choice. You're the only thing I've ever been sure of. And with that, he walked upstairs, leaving me alone in that dim kitchen with a cup of cold tea and the knowledge that he meant it. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from pain, but from wanting, and knowing that wanting isn't always wise. A week passed. Not fast, not slow, just suspended. Like we were both holding our breath, waiting for something to break the silence. Caleb spent most of his days outside working on the half-finished shed in the backyard, hammering, drilling, measuring, like the noise might drown out what neither of us dared to say. I stayed inside, pretending to read, pretending I wasn't listening for the sound of his boots outside my door. One night, I heard him pause in the hallway, but he didn't knock. And I didn't call out, because we both knew one more moment together might undo whatever fragile boundary we were trying to rebuild. It wasn't avoidance, it was restraint. And maybe that was our first real act of love. On the 8th day, I finally asked him to sit with me. He didn't hesitate, just sank into the armchair across from mine, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was bracing for impact. I need us to stop, I said. The words didn't echo. They didn't fall hard. They landed gently, like something we both knew was coming. Caleb didn't react, not visibly, but his silence said enough. I need to know, I continued, that what happened between us didn't erase everything else, that we still matter, just not like that. He looked at me, really looked. Eyes not angry, not hurt, just full of something deeper. Grief, maybe. You think I regret it? He asked softly. I shook my head. I think you're too young to see where it leads, and I'm too tired to let you follow me down that road. He was quiet for a long time. Then, almost in a whisper, you were the first person who made me feel chosen. Not pitied, not tolerated, just chosen. I never stopped choosing you, I said, but that choice has to look different now. He nodded. Not fast, not dramatic, just slow, like it hurt, but made sense. In the days that followed, we made space, literal space, emotional space. He moved into the guest room, took down the pictures of us laughing in the kitchen, started knocking before entering my room, even when I forgot to close the door. We made a new rhythm, a quieter one, a safer one. He still brought me tea every morning, still helped with my stretches, still ran the errands, still looked back every time he walked out the front door just to make sure I was okay. But now there was distance between us, not cold, just necessary. I started seeing a therapist again. He did too, separately, then eventually together. That was the hardest part. Saying it all out loud, naming what happened, naming what almost happened again. We didn't cry, but we did flinch. And still we stayed in the room. Because sometimes love doesn't look like kissing in the dark. Sometimes love looks like stepping back. So the other person has room to grow. A few months later, Caleb got a job offer. Santa Fe, construction apprenticeship. Good pay, good people. The kind of opportunity you don't pass up when you're 23 and finally starting to see who you are outside of someone else's shadow. He told me the night before he left. His suitcase was by the door. His boots were polished. He wore that same gray flannel he always pulled on when he didn't know how to say goodbye. I sat at the kitchen table pretending to scroll my phone, pretending I wasn't trying to memorize every detail of the moment. "I'll call," he said. "You'd better," I replied, keeping my voice steady. He walked over, bent down, and kissed my forehead. Just once. Soft. Final. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, even the messy parts." I didn't answer, just nodded. Because if I opened my mouth, I wouldn't stop. I watched him walk out the door, watched his taillights blink through the dusk. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt released. The next morning, the house was quiet in a new way. Not like something was missing, more like something had been put back where it belonged. I made my own coffee, pulled on my sweatshirt, rolled out to the porch, and let the sunlight touch my face. The air was cool. The pine trees swayed gently. The sky was wide and stupidly blue. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I just sat there, still, breathing, alive. I started writing again. Not stories, just thoughts. I started taking photos, snapshots from the porch. Birds, clouds, a squirrel that visited the same time every morning like it had an appointment. I listened to music again. Not background noise, but actual songs. And one day, I realized I wasn't waiting for Caleb to come back. I was waiting to feel like me again. And maybe I was getting close. He still calls. Not every day. Not like before. But enough. He tells me about his new coworkers. About the woman in HR who laughs at his dumb jokes. About how he's learning to make tamales from a guy named Tony. And when he talks, I listen. I smile. Because he's growing. And maybe, so am I. Some stories don't have clean endings. They don't tie themselves up with perfect goodbyes or dramatic last kisses. They just shift, quietly, softly, until what once felt impossible becomes part of the past you carry, not the weight you live under. Caleb and I don't talk about that night anymore. Not because we're ashamed, but because we've already said everything we needed to say. And now there's more power in what we choose not to say. The truth is, what we had was real. It was messy. It was complicated. But it was never pretend. And maybe that's why we survived it. Because we faced it with honesty, even when it hurt. Sometimes he'll send a photo from a hike. Sometimes I'll text him a random memory like the time he tried to make banana pancakes and nearly set off the smoke alarm. We don't pretend things didn't happen. We just don't let those things define us anymore. I've started doing small things on my own again. Not because I have to, but because I want to. I took my first solo trip to the farmer's market, bumped into someone, spilled a basket of apples, laughed instead of panicked. Progress. I've made new friends. One of them runs a support group for women in wheelchairs. Another teaches photography at the local college. We meet twice a month and talk about everything except what we've lost. It's not avoidance. It's reclaiming joy. I've learned that healing isn't forgetting. It's choosing a better direction even if your path still aches in the places it cracked. And I've learned that love, real love, isn't measured by how long someone stays in your bed. It's measured by whether they still see you clearly after the storm and whether you can see yourself just as clearly once they're gone. So if you've made it this far, thank you. Maybe this wasn't the kind of story you expected. Maybe it wasn't the kind you'd confess out loud, but if you've ever blurred the line between comfort and connection, if you've ever confused care with chemistry, if you've ever wanted something you knew you couldn't keep, then you know. Love isn't about impulse. It's about what you choose after the fire burns out. And boundaries. They aren't rejection. They're the clearest form of devotion. We don't always get a map, but we can still choose the next step, one honest story at a time.